How will I survive? This was a question that Naomi, a grief-stricken widow, had to ask herself. She had lost her husband, her sons, and her hope. When Naomi's sons died, she told her 2 Moabite daughter-in-laws, Orpah and Ruth, to return to their mother's house. They were widows now, without providers. Orpah and Ruth needed to ensure their security. Orpah decided to return home, the sensible choice. But Ruth chose a different path. Ruth pledged to stick by Naomi's side, traveling with her to a new country in pursuit of a new start. Naomi was returning to her homeland, Israel, and planned to travel alone. Ruth decided to accompany her. This wasn't a casual decision. This was an act of staunch bravery. Ruth was a Moabite, forbidden to marry an Israelite man. By pledging to stick by Naomi's side, she was consenting to a life of struggle and uncertainty. She could very easily expect to find herself living in poverty, miles away from the place that she called home. Nonetheless, this is the path she chose. Ruth devoted herself to Naomi and to Israel. We're taking a look at the redemption that God showed Ruth. Her critical decision to devote herself to Israel led to God's radical provision in every piece of her life. The mysteries in this story unravel to show us the heart of Messiah, God's redemptive power in a hope that crushes the boundaries of culture. In the book of Ruth, Boaz becomes Ruth's kinsman redeemer, in Hebrew, her Goel. Goel is also used to refer to God as Redeemer in the book of Exodus. A Goel, or a kinsman redeemer, was an individual who was obligated under Torah law to come to the aid of a family member who had fallen into dire financial straits. They were obligated to help that individual who had to either sell their property, their home, or even themselves into indentured servitude. The Goel would be the one to step in that time of need. Boaz became the Goel to Ruth and Naomi. Ruth and Naomi desperately needed a Goel. Without someone to help them, they would have been destitute. They would have been homeless. They would have been living in a state of poverty and a place of real danger. I think it's significant that the term Goel can refer to a human kinsman redeemer, but it can also refer to the Lord as the divine redeemer. This points to Yeshua, Jesus, who embodied both aspects of the Goel. He was God made manifest in the flesh because he came to redeem us on both a physical level and on a spiritual level as well. Ruth desperately needed Boaz. She would have been starving. She was completely homeless without him, and so was Naomi as well. But Boaz needed Ruth as much as Ruth needed Boaz, because he was an older man, advanced in years, with no children. From a Jewish thought, if you had no children, you had no legacy, you had no future. But when Ruth and Boaz came together, they ultimately birthed an important and very beautiful family together. And what's significant here to remember is that Ruth was a Moabite, she was a Gentile, and Boaz was Jewish from the tribe of Judah. It took Jew and Gentile coming together to ultimately birth the line of David through whom Messiah would come. Wow, this is so important to understand. Jew and Gentile have always needed each other. Whether it was Joseph and Pharaoh, whether it was Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar, or Esther and King Ahasuerus, or Peter and Cornelius, God always works in a special way when we come together in unity. That's why Yeshua Jesus prayed in John 17 that these and those would be one as he and the Father are one, because then we will be perfected in unity and the world will know the Father sent me. That's the significance of unity. That's the importance of Jew and Gentile coming together. When Ruth and Boaz, Jew and Gentile, came together, they helped to fulfill God's plan to birth the line and lineage of the Messiah, a legacy that still endures to this day. We need each other like Ruth and Boaz needed each other. And when we come together in unity, loving one another as family, it can change the world. That's the power of unity and relationship.
Marriage is one of the most important themes in the Bible. But what exactly does it mean in Scripture? Today in the West, marriage is seen as the ultimate expression of love. It's the culmination of your passion for someone else. But in Scripture, marriage is presented as a union that symbolizes so much more. A clue to the importance of marriage in Scripture is how it is discussed. Marriage is discussed in relation to two human partners like Adam and Eve, but also discussed as a union with God. Marriage, just as it is today, was a foundational social structure during biblical times. Marriage was a serious responsibility and a necessary way to grow and further communities. Let's look at marriage from the bride's perspective. Women in the ancient Near East were not property owners. They rarely had the responsibility of overseeing estates. Fathers provided for the family until the children departed and were wed. Young women worshipped the God that their father worshipped. But after marriage, women would be expected to worship the God of their husband. This meant that not only did marriage ensure the provision of worldly needs, it set the course for a bride's spiritual needs as well. The process of becoming married was no simple task. Generally, two families would negotiate the terms of the marriage. The groom's father would approach the bride's parents. He would offer a dowry or bride price. This was a financial gift given as a sign of good faith from the groom's father. A covenant marriage contract would then be drawn up by the two families. This was a binding, spiritual commitment between the two partners, their families, and God. Marriage wasn't just an act of passion and love. It was the merging of two families. For the bride, it was also assurance that her future would be secured. Marriage would allow a bride to rely on someone other than her parents, forging a path ahead with security and comfort. For the groom, marriage was an immense responsibility. Culturally, you are now responsible for the survival and well-being of another person, and that responsibility was an oath. This context reveals another layer to the verses about marriage. The church is described in Scripture as the bride of Christ. This name doesn't just indicate love, it shows us God's devotion, sacrifice, and authority over believers. The bridegroom was responsible for the well-being and provision of his bride. Ephesians 5:25-32 reads, "Husbands, love your wives, just as Messiah also loved his community and gave himself up for her, to make her holy, having cleansed her by immersion in the Word." Messiah did this so that he might present to himself his glorious community, not having stain or wrinkle or any such thing, but in order that she might be holy and blameless. In the same way, Husbands ought to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Messiah also does his community, because we are members of his body. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This mystery is great, but I am talking about Messiah and his community.